So as we come on the air tonight, we've got to say something that sounds a lot like what we've been saying. And I'm sorry to do this, and I know it's kind of antithetical to putting the new in news, but COVID confusion is tonight's headline. It just is, to the point where the CDC director had to come out and do some clarity cleanup today, with cases skyrocketing to the point schools can't stay open because of staff shortages. We're going to break down that, plus the latest testing guidance in just a minute. We're also going to take you live to Philadelphia after a horrific fire there led to what officials are calling one of the most tragic days in the city's history. So how did this get so out of hand? Plus, right now, literally right now, the January 6th committee is getting ready for an interview tonight with the former press secretary for former President Trump, 364 days after the Capitol riot. It's happening as the attorney general is now dropping some hints about where the insurrection investigation may go next. We'll explain. And we'll also have my exclusive interview with a member of Congress opening up about his mental health struggles and progress since that attack. Plus, it wasn't too long ago the Nets made a point of not letting Kyrie Irving play because he wouldn't get the COVID shot. But tonight he's back on the court as tennis star Novak Djokovic just got blocked from getting into Australia. We're going to have more on the drama over unvaxxed athletes up against a new opponent, their leagues. Hey, I'm Hallie, and any minute tonight we could get a decision on boosters for kids from the CDC. With those new COVID clarifications I referenced from the CDC director on when to test, when to isolate, and when to quarantine coming out, since that agency has been facing some real pushback on the way they've rolled out their new rules for people who do get COVID. And at the center of all of this, right, testing, when to test, the lack of tests, with Walmart and Kroger both now saying they're going to raise the prices for those rapid at-home tests you may have been doing over the holidays and even now. And then right as we were coming on the air, some news from the Grammys. Not happening. Nope, the awards show totally called off now, with the Recording Academy saying they just can't risk it with this Omicron variant surging as much as it is. We've also got more Barrett covering what's happened with the Chicago public schools after the teachers union staged a walkout of sorts because of COVID concerns. That's a big headline. But I want to start with Gabe Gutierrez, posted up for us in New York. So, Gabe, at this moment, as we speak, we're waiting for the CDC panel and the director to give that final green light for 12 to 15-year-olds to get Pfizer's booster, right? If that happens, and again, we think it's going to happen probably during this show, right? What's the timeline for when shots can actually get into arms if, in fact, they do give it the green light from there?
Well, hey there, Hallie. It could just be several days. As you know, this happens pretty much every time the CDC advisory panel is set to consider this, right? They have to, weigh all the options and basically make the recommendation to the CDC director, who typically signs off on it. This comes after the FDA signed off on this booster shot earlier in the week. So the question is right now, if it does get signed off on by this advisory panel, as we expected to, and then the CDC director, Dr. Walensky, gives her official sign-off. Again, Hallie, we could see this happen within a few days.
So as far as, and I'm sorry that you're having IFB troubles, Gabe, I hope you can hear me, but we know that the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, was trying to clarify the CDC guidance on testing if you do get COVID, right? What should we be all doing now based on that clarification? Explain it to me.
All right, so Hallie, as you know, there has been a lot of confusion here over the last couple of days with the CDC coming out with its initial recommendations, and then, now there are new recommendations. If we can put those up on the screen, if you test positive for COVID, but you don't have symptoms, now you can take an antigen test after a 5-day isolation period if you have access to a test and want to test. So again, Hallie, you stay home for 5 days and then wear a mask for 5 days after leaving isolation. Now, Hallie, this basically comes after the CDC director came under criticism earlier this week for essentially not recommending that people take an at-home COVID test after that 5-day isolation period. Her critics said that that was because the CDC was basing that recommendation, or lack of a recommendation, on the fact that there has been a shortage of at-home COVID tests, or really testing in general, really throughout the country. But now the CDC is out today saying if you have access to a test and you want to test, go ahead and do it. But the key thing here, Hallie, if you do test positive and you are isolating for 5 days, even after you clear that isolation period, you're asked to wear the mask for 5 extra days, for a total of 10 days, before you're out in public, on an airplane, eating in public without a mask. So the key thing, 5 days of isolation, and then at least 5 days more for a total of 10 days wearing a mask.
A capable breakdown, as always. Gabe Gutierrez, our NBC News national correspondent. Gabe, thank you so much for that. So in Chicago, you've got students, parents, teachers, local officials who don't agree on much right now, but they can agree on one thing. They are all very upset. That's after Chicago Public Schools decided to cancel school today for more than 300,000 students. And that's because most of the Chicago's teachers union voted late Tuesday, so overnight, to switch to remote learning. It's being described as a virtual walkout because those teachers are worried about safety in the class because of the surge in COVID cases. But here's the thing. Teachers and staff tried to log into their systems this morning, but they couldn't get in. And that turned into some serious frustration vented on Twitter. Watch. Rebecca Coven, who's a teacher, if you look at your screen, says, couldn't teach remotely today because Chicago Public Schools locked me out of my account. We're just trying to teach. Hashtag Lori Lockout, a reference to Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Dennis Koseth, a school nurse, tweeting, I had 5 meetings today scheduled with families whose children need special education and have medical conditions. We asked for safety and got a hashtag Lori Lockout instead. So what's up with the lockout? City leaders said if there's no in-person class, there should be no class at all. So this afternoon, both sides headed back to the negotiating table. So Maura Barrett joining us live now from Chicago. What is the deal with the negotiations, right? What is happening? Are they at that table now? Is it going to be days before they get there? What's up?
Well, Hallie, it's been a very drawn-out process because, as you might remember, this is something we've been talking about for the entirety of the pandemic in terms of the contention between the teachers union and Chicago Public Schools. But yeah, as we understand it, they're still at the negotiating table. They met a couple hours ago, and we have not received an announcement about tomorrow's learning plan. But we are hearing from the public school system and the CEO that we will have a plan for students, quote, later today about tomorrow's plan. But both these sides super hostile and have very differing opinions about what constitutes as safe, because officials here, city officials and school officials, are saying that schools already are safe, but teachers don't feel that way right now. Let's take a look at what each side is looking for, what they're willing to compromise on. Teachers are hoping that students get a negative test to return to buildings before coming back to school in person. They want an expansion of the weekly testing program that's already in place, but they say is very confusing. They're looking for N95 masks for students and teachers, more vaccination opportunities, and they want remote learning for at least the next 2 weeks coming off of this holiday break when people were socializing with their families. And then you look at what Chicago Public Schools is proposing, essentially what the teachers union rejected yesterday with this vote. They said they'll provide 200,000 KN95 masks and are planning to offer 30,000 screening tests in schools per week. But reminder, this is a school district of over 300,000 people. So that won't exactly cut it in terms of the student testing. And then they're also looking to close schools as needed in terms of remote learning on a school-by-school basis, looking at a specific measurement that can get very confusing around whether teachers are out for how many days, how many teachers are testing positive, students testing positive. But they're very adamant that this can be tackled by a school-by-school approach versus shutting down the entire district.
Right. They're hoping to keep kids in school because of the abilities for them to learn and to socialize and the things they need for that. Here's the bottom line. And we said this, right off the bat. People are unhappy, right? Students and their parents, and we heard from some of them today.
We did, and the opinions from parents and students alike, too, are very differing, just like we're seeing from school officials and the teachers. One father we spoke to said he doesn't understand why his fully vaccinated kids can't go to school if he's able to go. He went to a dentist appointment yesterday and had his mouth wide open, but his kids can't go to school, and he saw how detrimental remote learning was for their mental health. And then on the flip side, other parents are very concerned about their kids' safety given how contagious the Omicron variant is. I want you to hear from a student and a parent that we heard from this afternoon, and their frustration is just so clear.
All of the stuff that Lori Lightfoot said in that meeting yesterday, pointing fingers at Jesse Sharkey, pointing fingers at CTU, at the end of the day, she is 100% the one to be upset with. She's the mayor.
The mayor and the district do not know what it's like to stay up until 11 p.m. riddled with anxiety, waiting for decisions to be made that will affect the life of yourself and the lives of the people you love.
these parents and students looking for accountability, looking for what leadership that they say isn't there. Now, we did hear from the public school CEO this afternoon. He said that less than 15% of teachers showed up today because they did keep the school buildings open for those students that might need meals at school, or if testing was being done, admin and staff was still able to come in, but that was less than 15% of teachers that showed up. And so no matter what this next negotiation, whether we get it tonight or, like you said, in a couple of days, I have a feeling this is not the last bit of disagreement we see between these two entities.
Maura Barrett, live in Chicago. Thanks. In Philly, the feds are joining the investigation into what caused that deadly fire in Philadelphia that has officials describing it as one of the most tragic days in the city's history.
I've been around for 35 years now, and this is probably one of the worst fires I've ever been to.
13 people died in that fire, including 7 kids. You're looking at what's left after the fire ripped through that building. Look at that. It ignited early this morning with one neighbor saying he woke up to screams. First Lady Jill Biden sending her condolences to the families and loved ones of the victims earlier. And we've just learned that President Biden has been briefed about this massive fire in Philadelphia as well. Ron Allen is live for us on the ground. And Ron, the building where this happened is owned by the Philadelphia Housing Authority. Do we have any indication yet of how this fire clearly got so out of control?
A couple of things, Hallie. Smoke detectors in the building did not work. It's unclear exactly how many there were, and that they were inspected last spring, we were told, by the Philadelphia Housing Authority, but they didn't work. For what reason, it's unclear. So that's a big factor. Another big factor is that there were as many as 26 people or more, perhaps, living in the residence. They may have all been living there. Some maybe have been visiting during the holiday season. It's unclear, but there were apparently a lot of people in what essentially are 2 relatively small apartments in this one big row house. So there's that. The fire officials earlier said that it appears the fire started in a kitchen, and then the fire swept up the stairwell from the 2nd floor to the 3rd floor. And according to what we've been told about where people were, most of the people who lived here were on the top floor. So apparently they weren't able to get down the stairs to get out. Another problem is that there are only 2 exits and entrances, one at the front, one at the back, both on the 1st floor, which is the way many of these homes in this neighborhood are configured. So there's that as a factor as well.
It's just awful to hear about, especially when you think about the victims here. We talked about it, 7 children, 13 people overall killed, and Philadelphia officials calling it one of the most tragic days ever in Philly. Can you talk to us about what we're learning about the victims and what we're learning about, I think, a couple of survivors, too, because 2 of the people who survived this were taken to the hospital?
There are still 2 people in the hospital. One is an adult, another is a child, is what officials have told us. And they are in critical but stable condition, is how it was described to us just about an hour or so ago. We hope to get an update soon. We haven't heard much from the city since earlier today. There were also as many as 8 people or more who escaped, some rescued by fire officials who arrived on the scene here. Again, this is happening at 6:30 in the morning when people are just waking up, when most of the neighborhood was probably still asleep. People were talking about how they woke up and heard screams, people crying out for help. And that's how this all started to unfold. So that's where we are now. This investigation obviously is going to take a very long time. And they're going to look at all kinds of issues like whether the housing codes were violated, why these smoke detectors didn't work, so on and so forth. There are just so many factors. But the bottom line is this: at this moment, the city and others here are trying to do everything they can to support these families and get them through this for now. And again, we're watching again at the hospital because there is the possibility that the death toll sadly might increase. Hallie?
Ron Allen live for us with that horrific story in Philadelphia. Ron, we'll look for more of your reporting tonight on NBC Nightly News. Thank you. I want to get you to some breaking news. We started off the show with it, right? We talked about the CDC panel looking at whether to recommend boosters for 12 to 15-year-olds, the Pfizer booster. Guess what just happened in the last couple seconds? They approved it, right? So that panel gave it the green light. We still need to hear from CDC Director Rochelle Walensky that she is officially giving the final sign-off. So it's not a total done deal yet. But as you heard Gabe Gutierrez report at the top of the show, it could mean that within a matter of days, that age group, those teens ages 12 to 15, will be able to get the Pfizer booster. So yet another step, yet another tool in the arsenal in the fight against this pandemic. All right. Other news now here in Washington. right, where hundreds of officials of the Justice Department are trying to make cases against the rioters who charged the Capitol on January 6th, 364 days ago. And not too long ago, we heard from Attorney General Merrick Garland, who made a real point to say that anyone responsible at any level, listen for that when he says it, at any level will be prosecuted. Watch.
The Justice Department remains committed to holding all January 6 perpetrators at any level accountable under law.
I want to bring in Ken Delaney to talk more about this as we get closer and closer now, really just a matter of hours away to that one-year commemoration of January 6th. So, Ken, I make the point that Garland made the point about saying holding people at any level accountable because, you know, I think to some people, it sounds like maybe the Attorney General is responding to some of the criticism that he's getting from Democrats, that the DOJ is focusing too much on these so-called foot soldiers and not high-ranking officials, including people who may have been in the White House, like perhaps former President Trump. That's something that Congressman Adam Schiff talked with me about yesterday. We talked about it on the show. How did you hear that? How did you read that from the Attorney General, and how significant is it?
I think it's clear that he is trying to respond to that criticism in the constrained way that it's available to him, because this is a secret investigation, Hallie. You know, the DOJ can't telegraph where they're going with this or what the evidence shows. And in fact, as Pete Williams has often pointed out on the air, they have not even alleged in court records that any of these groups actually conspired, planned in advance to attack the Capitol. They've alleged that they've conspired to commit violence that day, but we've seen no public evidence of plans to attack the Capitol. So, but when we ask legal experts about that, and I actually spoke to some investigators today on the January 6th committee about this, they say, look, just because the DOJ hasn't charged it doesn't mean they don't have the evidence, and doesn't mean they're not looking for that evidence. And look, while this investigation has gone a long way, and more than 700 defendants and massive amounts of evidence and 300,000 tips coming into the FBI, there still is a long way to go. It's fairly clear. There's a lot that they are still gathering and looking at. And whether his line alluded to, you know, leaders of far-right groups who weren't present at the Capitol, or whether he's talking about people at the White House or even President Trump, remains to be seen. But it's clear that he is somewhat sensitive to some of the criticism from Adam Schiff and others that the DOJ isn't looking at the big fish.
What he also mentioned were these threats that have been coming up, right? And I look at this poll that's out from the Washington Post asking if it's ever justified for citizens, for people to take violent action against the government. It is I think it's fair to call it shocking, Ken. 34% of people, a third of America, 1 in 3 people that you know think it's justified to use violence against the government in their view. This is something that the Attorney General kind of alluded to here, right? He talked about these attacks against election officials, against lawmakers, against, frankly, members of the press, against others who serve in government. He's taking this really seriously.
He is, and so are other parts of the government, Hallie. In fact, I spoke to officials at the Department of Homeland Security this week who said, here's another wrinkle to this, that foreign governments, foreign intelligence agencies are actually spewing out propaganda to amplify these kinds of divisions and make Americans angrier to turn against one another. And Garland, I think, highlighted this for a very specific reason. He pointed out in his speech that the DOJ prosecuted more defendants for making these threats last year than at any time in the last 5 years. So he was saying, look, we're going to go after this behavior, but really it's more than a prosecution issue. You know, this is a sickness at the heart of American society, and an institutionalist like Merrick Garland is very disturbed about it clearly, and he thinks that it's a threat to democracy. So he's going to do what he can do, which is prosecute people who make threats against public officials, Hallie.
Ken Delaney, live for us in D.C. Ken, thank you. Think back to a year ago, right, after we all watched those violent scenes play out in the Capitol, when there was a sense that maybe that riot would put an end to the lie that drove the insurrection, the lie that the election was stolen. But a year later, a year after, the images that you're looking at right here on your screen, that so-called Stop the Steal movement is only getting stronger inside the Republican Party, bolstered by former President Trump, who's still spreading the conspiracy theory that he won, even though he did not. And that was proven. It was proven by multiple recounts in key swing states, by dozens of rejections to flimsy legal challenges propped up by his allies. Even his own attorney general acknowledged no widespread fraud. And yet, NBC News polling shows nearly 3/4 of Republicans now agree with what's known as the big lie. And that's putting a spotlight on races we might not normally be looking at, right? For elections officials at the state level, like for Secretary of State, with some sounding the alarm about what that could mean for our democracy. What are the biggest warning signs that are flashing to you right now?
All of this is no longer about 2020. It's about the next election. When the loser doesn't like the outcome of the results, being able to more easily claim victory.
Colorado's Democratic Secretary of State Jenna Griswold points out it's positions like hers, a state's top elections official, that keep the guardrails in place. But this year, about 2/3 of Republican candidates for that position in key swing states have questioned the results of the 2020 election.
The next time a candidate wants to reject the actual results of an election, it will be easier for them to do so. That's what this is all about.
Some of those Secretary of State candidates backed by Mr. Trump, who's endorsed Mark Fincham in Arizona.
By removing the fraud, Donald Trump won.
Election denier Christina Caramo in Michigan.
That makes us feel like they're complicit in stealing the election from the American people.
And Jody Hice in Georgia, a congressman who led an objection to his own state's results.
We have lost election integrity in Georgia. We have lost election confidence in Georgia.
And that Georgia race highlights what's at stake. Hice, who declined our request for an interview, is challenging the current Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, the man who famously resisted Mr. Trump's pressure to overturn Georgia's election results.
I just want to find 11,780 votes.
Raffensperger's refusal protected the legitimate results in Georgia, but he's been out fundraised by Hice. Is this the GOP that you want to be a part of here?
I think that we need to realize that we have honest and fair elections, particularly in Georgia.
I'm going to have more on my reporting as NBC News looks at the state of extremism in this country. More on that topic coming up tonight on NBC Nightly News. Our own Lester Holt is anchoring from right here in Washington tonight and tomorrow ahead of a sit-down with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. All of it, again, 6:30 Eastern, only on NBC. Coming up here on the show, the Mid-Atlantic saw its biggest snowstorm in 3 years, and it's not over yet. There's more snow headed there and the Northeast this week. We've got Al Roker, the man with the plan on what to expect after the break. Out with one major storm system, in with another. Welcome to January, folks. We've got 78 million people right now under winter alerts for several systems that are brewing across the country from the Pacific Northwest to New England. Coming right after Virginia finally cleared up that 50-mile traffic jam on I-95 from Monday's storm. Ugh. Let me get to Al Roker. Al, I love having you on, and I don't want to sound like a broken record because we say it sort of every time this week. Winter is here. Like, winter is here and snow is winter. But there are some different storm systems that are affecting a lot of people this week in the U.S., right?
That's right, Hallie. And after December being one of the warmest on record, take a look. We're talking about wind chills for 15 million people, stretching from northern Texas all the way up to the northern plains, Minnesota, Iowa. Frostbite can occur awfully quickly, and we're also looking at 78 million people coast to coast under winter weather advisory, storm watches, or warnings. Here's what we've got starting tomorrow morning. Storm system developing in the Appalachians, but another system develops off the coast of the Carolinas. Snow will develop from Tennessee on into Pennsylvania, and then Friday, it all moves off the coast quickly, but morning snow, slick travel for all of our friends along the I-95 corridor. Eastern New England on into Boston, anywhere from 6 to 8 inches of snow possible. Also back to the Appalachians, we're talking 2 to 4 inches of snow in New York City, 3 to 6 in Washington, D.C., Charleston, 4 to 8. Pittsburgh, 2 to 4 inches of snow in the Great Lakes because those lakes are wide open. So lake effect snow, that machine's going to start cranking up. Some places along the Great Lakes could see nearly a foot of snow. And out west, another big storm system slamming the Pacific Northwest, Hallie, with heavy rain and snow in Oregon and Washington. They've got flood watches from Seattle down to Portland. And Friday, that rain will linger off the coast with areas of flooding. Rainfall amounts anywhere from 1 to 5 inches of rain and snowfall just east of Seattle to into Jackson Hole, Wyoming. We're talking some places picking up 1.5 feet or more of snow, Hallie. So this is it's a fast mover here in the east, but we're going to be seeing temperatures dropping rapidly. It's hard to believe. Washington, D.C. has more snow at this point than Boston or
That's
Denver.
so weird. Like, Al, that's weird, right? I mean, I live in D.C. and I grew up in Philly.
Yes.
Like, I'm no stranger to storms. I know what it's like to put your boots on and your coat to go out in the winter. But it's really unusual for D.C. what we're facing now, and that it hasn't melted, right? I feel like a lot last year when it would snow, it would melt kind of right away the next day. Let me tell you this, the ice on the trees is still like this thick here. It's just staying cold.
Which is a big problem, and we've got more cold air, reinforcing cold air coming in this weekend. So it's a very active season right now. The weather patterns very active, but the good news is it's a fast mover. This one hopefully not as bad. The problem we've been seeing again, this climate change connection. These storms tend to overproduce. That's what happened in Virginia earlier this week when they were getting snowfall 1 to 2 inches per hour, and listen, it's hard for snow crews those snow plows to keep up with that kind of thing, but they were obviously caught a little unawares, and that just really added to the problem, Hallie.
And it's interesting, Al, to hear the stories now that we're starting to come out, too, of the I-95 thing, like the bakery truck driver who was giving out loaves of bread to people on the highway, the guy who paid $600 for his Uber because he got stuck in this thing. Like, I'd be so mad. Al Roker, thank you so much. Appreciate it. We'll see you tomorrow morning on the Today Show. Coming up here on this show, protests in Kazakhstan getting worse, people storming official buildings, the internet in the whole country has been cut. We're going to tell you why in the 5 things. We're also hearing from the Capitol Police Chief ahead of the anniversary of the insurrection on January 6th. What he had to say about the challenges his department still faces, and who else is going to be in the hot seat in front of that select committee coming up. Tomorrow marks 1 year since the attack at the Capitol. And for those who were actually there, in some ways, it's re-triggering the trauma. That's what I talked about with one congressman and the effect that day has had on his mental health. That's coming up in an exclusive you'll only see here in a minute. But first, let's get you over to the 5 things. Some stories our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the U.S. government says it's charged one of the main suspects in the killing of Haitian President Jovenel Moise and charged him with conspiracy to commit murder outside the U.S. Mario Antonio Palacios is from Colombia. He was extradited to the U.S. from Panama this week. He was in federal court in Miami Tuesday, but didn't enter a plea. Number 2, we talked about those mass protests in Kazakhstan right before the commercial break. Why are they happening? Partly because of a jump in gas prices. Now the country's government has resigned, and the president there has declared a state of emergency. We're watching it. Number 3, North Korea, you heard about this, fired a suspected ballistic missile into the Sea of Japan today. The first launch since October, happening just days after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un vowed to prop up the country's military. Number 4, Louisiana's governor posthumously pardoned Homer Plessy today. Plessy was the black man who was arrested in 1892 for refusing to leave a whites-only railroad car. His case eventually made it to the Supreme Court, which ended up ruling against him in what's now known as the separate but equal landmark ruling. Number 5, check this out. Look at your screen. The mountaineer flying the trans pride flag on some of the world's highest mountain peaks. This is Colorado native Erin Parisi on a mission to climb the highest peaks on all 7 continents. It's a goal she decided on after coming out as transgender in 2016. So far, she's finished 5 of the 7 highest summits. And she says flying the trans pride flag at each one symbolizes taking trans representation above the shadows. Back here to news in Washington, the message from the Capitol Police Chief to senators: we need more help, we need more money, we need more supplies, and we need more bodies. Chief Tom Manger, that's who you see right there, was not in charge of the Capitol Police on the day of the insurrection, but he is in charge now. And he says his department is short more than 400 officers. And he was pretty clear to Republican Senator Roy Blunt about what it's going to take to build up his team. Watch.
Look, realistically, I think it's going to take us at least 2 to 3 years to get up to our staffing in terms of hiring new officers.
We're also learning tonight former Trump press secretary Stephanie Grisham, she's right there, she's going to meet with the January 6th Select Committee tonight, by the way. That's like happening either now or will be happening the next couple hours. She spoke with a Democratic congressman, apparently, Jamie Raskin, on the day of the riot. I want to go to Sahil Kapoor, who's on the Hill now. Sahil, let me start there with Stephanie Grisham. She just wrote a big tell-all book not too long ago, right? Excoriating the Trumps, talking about her time in the White House. She ended up resigning sort of in protest after the riot happened, and she felt the Trumps did not take a strong enough stance against it, although she, of course, has been in the Trump orbit, was in that orbit for many years prior. Talk about why the committee wants to speak with her, what communication she may have had, and why with Jamie Raskin.
Hey, Hallie. Well, firstly, it's happening now. Just in the last minute or two, I got a text message from my colleague who is staking out that location, and she is meeting with the committee as we speak. Now, Stephanie Grisham is, of course, someone who worked in the White House for years throughout the entirety of Donald Trump's presidency. She started off with the First Lady, as you well know, then became the White House press secretary, and then went back to the First Lady's office. Jamie Raskin has said they're interested in her because of her proximity to the president, that anyone who worked in the White House and had that proximity to Donald Trump may have valuable information about what happened in the run-up to January 6th and potentially that day of. Now, of course, the caveat is for the last 8 months of the Trump White House, she was working with the First Lady, and there's no indication, we've seen no indication at least, that Melania Trump had much communication about the January 6th attack as it was unfolding, with her husband at the time. So it's unclear how much she knows, but if she does know anything, she seems to be in a pretty good place to talk about it. She did say in her tell-all book that she regrets not speaking up more about, criticisms that she felt were necessary in the Trump White House.
And I should note, she spoke with Congressman Raskin, actually, after he apparently they were talking about information that she might have had, what she might have known, right, about what was happening in the White House on the day that January 6th went down.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a huge part of the committee's mandate.
I want to talk about the Capitol Police. We mentioned that just a second ago. We know that Congress has approved something like $400 million for more security measures. That happened over the summer. He's now today in the ever cliched hot seat. Forgive me for using that language, but he was in front of members of Congress saying, listen, we're not going to make the same mistakes again. Talk about specifics on that and why that's so important.
Yeah, Major discussed a whole host of changes that the Capitol Police has made since he took over, since the January 6th attacks, to try to make sure something like that never happens again. The thing that stuck out to me the most is how much he emphasized the issue of intelligence, how they've overhauled their processes of gathering intelligence, of analyzing it, and setting up procedures to act on it. He candidly admitted that there was evidence, there was intelligence ahead of January 6th that violence was going to occur in the Capitol. It was all right out there in internet forums and far-right spaces, Trump supporters saying we're going to do this, we're going to carry weapons, we're going to break in, but they didn't act on it. And he's insisting that the Capitol Police will do whatever they can to make sure that that doesn't happen again, and that they'll do a better job communicating with other agencies like DC Metro Police and the FBI, rather than waiting until something like this happens and recriminations and finger pointing after the fact. And of course, staffing is a huge issue for them. The morale has taken a major hit over the last year. Capitol Police officers about this time last year did not recognize that they'd be signing up to combat insurrections, and now it's pretty clear that could be the call of duty.
Sahil Kapoor, thank you very much for that reporting. I appreciate it. And I know we'll be talking with you more again tomorrow. Appreciate it, Sahil, because tomorrow, of course, marks a year since that insurrection. And even though the broken glass has long since been fixed and the protective fencing around the Capitol was taken down months ago, there are still scars, invisible ones, among those processing the trauma of what they went through a year ago. We've been covering that fallout, the fallout you can't see, by documenting the mental health struggles of people who lived through the Capitol riot, including one member of Congress who huddled in the House gallery, whose video, shot on his phone, this is it, became one of the most familiar and chilling scenes from that day, showing officers, guns drawn, in the House chamber. That video was shot by Congressman Dan Kildee, who in April, for the very first time, alongside his therapist, Dr. Jim Gordon, shared the post-traumatic stress he faced as part of his mental health struggles after the 6th.
I had a lot of tension in my chest. Breathing was difficult. I became really irritable. Most people who experience trauma don't experience it in real time on every network across the world. They do it privately, quietly, painfully, silently, alone. And so if I can speak to them, that's what I want to do.
So now, almost a year after that attack, I sat down again with Congressman Kildee, this time virtually, to see what changed and what hasn't. Here we are 1 year later, almost a year after January 6th. How are you doing?
A lot better. Obviously, the first few weeks after the attack were really tough, and I struggled, and we talked about that. But I've been regularly talking to Dr. Jim Gordon, who was on with you and I. That process has been really helpful to me. So on one hand, personally, I'm myself again. I feel good. I feel like I was able to get through the trauma of that event. But on another level, it's really still troubling, and in some ways more troubling than it was then, because I thought, perhaps naively, that the attack on January 6th would cause the fever to break, that the people who've been sort of part of this concoction, this falsehood, would come to their senses, realizing what a consequence there is facilitating that big lie, that the consequence was a violent attack on our Capitol. Surely, I thought, this would be the turning point where we can kind of get back to sort of the rational center and, you know, engage in a big debate about the issues that we face as a country, not double down on this. And unfortunately, in the last year, it's gone the wrong direction.
I wonder what kind of impact that has had on your mental health. Are you still utilizing some of the practices and the techniques that Dr. Gordon worked with you on?
I am. It's very helpful. I mean, I encourage people who've experienced trauma or who have any need that, you know, deals with their mental health to get the help they need. But for me, what has continued to be difficult is the fact that I'm still angry at the people who were a part of this attack, but more angry that they continue to pretend that it didn't happen or to minimize it or to minimize what happened to us. I resent that. But part of the process has been sort of not allowing that anger to poison me, to cause me to carry that anger around all the time. I've got to work with these people. I've got to look at them every day. I do look at them differently, but I still have to find a way to work with them. And so I don't let that anger consume me the way it did in the weeks that followed the attack.
When you and I spoke, when you first revealed for the first time your mental health struggles after January 6th, after that interview aired, I know you got a lot of praise from people who really applauded that you were trying to destigmatize mental health struggles. You also got some backlash, Congressman, from people. How much did that backlash for you sharing your story affect you?
Well, you know, I was prepared for it. I expected it. It shows that we have a long way to go. But, you know, I was aware that that backlash would come and tried to use that very backlash itself as a moment to point out why it's so important to destigmatize mental health, why it's so important to not put people in a position where they're doubtful if they want to even try to get the help that they know they need because of the stigma that comes with it. It also had the effect of encouraging other members of Congress and staff who were in the Capitol on that day to also seek help. I've had dozens of people come to me and say, because you said what you said, because you acknowledged that you were having some struggles after the attack and got help for it, I did too.
Do you feel like this commemoration tomorrow of 1 year since the 6th is re-triggering for you?
In some ways it is, because watching the video, I'm just reminded of how vicious and violent that attack was. It does bring some of that back. However, more importantly, for those of us who've gone through it, and I mean all of us, it's important that we commemorate this moment and we do it in a way that honors the truth of that day. Because the most important principle that we're all pursuing right now, for those of us who are a part of this, it's really important that the truth of that day be told and it be done in an honest fashion. And that's what we hope the commemoration will achieve.
Our thanks to Congressman Dan Kildee for continuing to share his story, for continuing to talk about the importance of trying to destigmatize mental health. You know, it's something we like to do on this show as much as we can. We got a lot more ahead coming up. Speaking of this show, including the Consumer Electronics Show in full swing, our own Joel Kent has a look at some of the latest innovations, like this, oh man, creepy human robot. I don't know. We're going to talk about it. Oh God, it's so real. We'll talk about it after the break. I can't. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Our West Coast Bureau is reporting Airbnb is trying something new in Oregon, an experiment it hopes it will help prevent discrimination against Black travelers. What they're doing is blocking hosts from seeing guests' full names. So you only get to see the full names after confirming the booking. They're going to run this experiment for at least 2 years. Also coming from our West Coast Bureau, Californians getting hit with new water restrictions. The state is still dealing with a drought, and the voluntary conservation efforts didn't help as much as people had hoped. So now Californians cannot water their lawns for 2 full days after it rains, and they cannot let sprinklers run onto the sidewalk. If they don't follow those rules, they could get fined $500 daily. From our Midwest Bureau, if you were missing an Amazon package over the holidays, it might be in Oklahoma. Police say they found almost 600 Amazon packages outside Oklahoma City on New Year's Eve. So far, 3 people have been arrested. They're all tied to this Amazon theft ring involving thousands of dollars of goods. Thanks. Today, the world's biggest electronics showcase kicks off its first in-person convention in 2 years. We're talking about the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas, CES. Techies know it, where the public will get a look at the latest TV, drones, smartwatches, other gadgets. But COVID concerns have kept some companies away, right? They're not presenting in person, including big names like Amazon, Google, BMW, Mercedes, even TikTok. But even with a smaller audience, one of this year's highlights involves virtual augmented reality, right? Involves getting into the metaverse, including a contact lens. This is it, that transports you into an augmented world. This is the future. The future is here. Joe Lincoln is in the future. And I know that you, Joe, it's so good to see you. I know you got to, let's say this, get around some of the NBC News COVID protocols and show up in a very unconventional way this year.
Yes, that's right. I mean, normally I would be coming to you live from the show floor in Las Vegas. Clearly, I am in warm and sunny Los Angeles in our bureau courtyard here. And the reason is because of the pandemic. But that couldn't stop us from actually going and checking out CES. In fact, we were able to travel by 3D hologram. I'm going to show you some video, but I was able to transport myself almost 300 miles from our bureau to the Las Vegas CES show floor. And the idea
hologram Joe, I'm obsessed. Look at this. It's incredible.
And look, Hallie, you and I, we're moms, we're newish moms, and we're both like, how do we be in 2 places at once?
Oh my God, don't tell our bosses. Stop talking now.
Exactly.
That's a disaster.
Exactly. But what's so cool about this technology is it's really, I mean, it's been long in development before the pandemic, but the idea here is really to put you in a place where you can eliminate your carbon footprint. You don't have to travel. You don't have to book that hotel room, right? And it's all part of this idea of getting you somewhere else so you're able to do more and do what's better for your own life. And that's also a theme of the buzzy metaverse as well. But back to that hologram, we expect to see it to go pretty mainstream in the next 5 or 10 years. I got to interview the CEO, and this is what he told me.
People walk up to a device, they see a hologram, and it's a shared experience. You don't need a headset. You don't need to download something on your phone.
So the idea here is to mainstream it. So they're now Portal, this company, is taking that life-size hologram that I appeared as, and now they're shrinking it down to what they call the M, and it's a more affordable, smaller device that they hope to deploy to more universities, more hospitals, and more homes to get you where you want to go.
Like eventually, this is a Jetsons thing where our parents are going to be talking to our kids like via hologram every night. You know what I mean? What's so interesting too, and Joe, you mentioned this, it's a pandemic, right? So what's interesting is that some of these, I don't want to call them gadgets, but some of these innovations at CES involve health technology. And some of this stuff could be incredibly useful down the road.
Yeah, you mentioned the smart contact lens and the augmented reality that it can basically transport you into in a blink of an eye. That is not FDA approved yet. That is a prototype. But there's some other stuff that is coming to market pretty soon. You've got the smart faucet where you can adjust the temperature of the water with just the wave of your hand. There's a new cool battery-free thermometer that a lot of people obviously probably need in the pandemic. And in order to use it, you just shake it to recharge it. And so it's a smart thermometer that works pretty cool. So there's lots of interesting gadgets like that you will probably see come to market. One thing I really liked was this Samsung portable projector. It's the size of like a coffee can, and you can take it anywhere you want to go and project it onto any surface and watch your Netflix.
I mean, who doesn't want Netflix on the go? I have to tell you though, okay, so that's the thing that you're into. Can I just tell you what I am like obsessed with, but maybe not in a great way? And this is no disrespect to this bizarre humanoid robot, but it's like the most humanoid looking robot. We're going to show some video of it here. I mean, oh man, it like makes me feel like we're in a movie, and I have some anxiety about it. I have to imagine that this robot, Amica, I think she's called, is getting a lot of attention.
Yeah, getting a lot of attention because it's very human-like in the way that the robot looks at you and interacts.
Face.
Yeah, the hands. And what's interesting about that is that when you think about robotics technology, we often don't think about the AI, the artificial intelligence that's associated with it. The company says that their mission is to create humanoid robots that also pair with super advanced artificial intelligence.
Oh,
so
cool.
you can interpret that how you will. Yeah, exactly.
It is absolutely fascinating technology, though. Joe, I'm glad you got to at least see a little bit of CES, even if virtually holographically.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Thank
great.
you, friend. Appreciate it.
Good to see you, too.
Coming up on the show, here's the thing about delivery services. We love them, right? Because we love convenience. And maybe that's why Walmart is doubling down, so to speak, on its delivery service, saying it's expanding their in-home delivery to 30 million Americans by the end of the year. We literally mean in-home. Here's how it works. Once an order is placed with the service, which is about $20 a month, a Walmart employee wearing a body cam will use a smart lock. That's another fee if you don't already have one. It's called in-home because they come in your home. They go in your fridge. So it really should be called in-fridge. They pack your fridge with your groceries. Their main competitor here is Amazon, which launched something kind of similar back in 2017. Ben Popkin is here with more. Lazy people rejoice, Ben, on the one hand, right? Or busy people who can come home and open their fridge and there's their groceries. On the other hand, privacy concerns, right? Security concerns. How is Walmart managing to balance this?
Right. I mean, Walmart, like you said, has really said this is for the customers who want to be able to set and forget it and go out, do the things they want to spend their time doing. So you don't have to hang out all afternoon waiting for delivery. You can go pick up your kid from school. You can go for that run. This is about convenience. But I'm also thinking that this might come in handy if you have a neighborhood where there's a lot of porch pirates. If you're worried about that, I think this will come in handy. But that data is really interesting. I mean, you said, they're wearing the camera going into the house.
Right.
I mean, maybe it gives them a chance to see, okay, let's find out exactly how many Electrolux refrigerators our customers have and how much space they have in there. We haven't heard from Walmart how they're handling those privacy concerns.
That's what I was going to ask. Data collection, that's a whole new frontier, right? Because it's one thing to go get groceries delivered. And by the way, a lot of us are getting our groceries delivered in the pandemic. 11% in 2019, now 23%. So the number of people getting their groceries ordered and delivered has doubled in the pandemic. But when you talk about, again, the privacy security piece, there's some question marks here.
Yeah, unanswered questions for now. Definitely that kind of data is really valuable to a big company like Walmart. They can get inside the black box of customers' houses. And they've also talked about this as an experiment in a way. So I think people are wondering, how does this really make money for Walmart? Well, I think they're willing to kind of try it out. And they've said they're going to do that before they scale it further. They also have a lot of different other upsides. I mean, someone who's buying groceries, well, they can also upsell their Walmart. They can upsell them to a refrigerator, a Barbie doll, a bike, whatever you want.
So I'm sorry, but I didn't mean to cut you off there. I'm so intrigued by this. I have a million questions for you because I look at Amazon, right? Amazon has a service that we alluded to, kind of similar. It's called Key. But they put it in your garage, right? It's an in-garage service. They launched, I think, a few years ago. They're in thousands of cities across the country now. Has that been successful? Did the success of that trigger Walmart to do this? Walmart really is trying to go more head-to-head with Amazon, it seems, on this.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, Walmart is one-upping Amazon and Jeff Bezos. Hey, you're delivering to the garage. Well, we're going to put it, right in their refrigerator. So Walmart is under a huge amount of pressure to catch up to Amazon's revenue in the home delivery space. And you're seeing how they're rolling this out. They're essentially using the back office space of existing Walmarts as miniature warehouses, which is what Amazon did with Whole Foods when they took it over. They turned them all into warehouses. I mean, if you've gone shopping at Whole Foods, I feel like sometimes there's more, home delivery people getting groceries next to you than actual other customers. But Walmart, they have nearly 5,000 stores across the U.S. There's only 500 Whole Foods. So if Walmart can really turn this battleship around, it gives them a huge reach to compete with Amazon.
Such a good point. Ben Popkin, love having you on. Thank you, friend. Appreciate it. Coming up, basketball star Kyrie Irving making his season debut tonight on the road since he hasn't been able to play home games for the Nets because of the city's vaccine mandate. We're going to have more on that and the latest on tennis star Novak Djokovic, I should say. Joka drama, call it, because he's not even allowed into Australia. We'll have that breaking news on what's up with his visa in just a sec. Remember 24 hours ago, just yesterday, just not that long ago, it seemed like Novak Djokovic was all clear to play at the Australian Open, the world's best tennis player. Even though he's not vaccinated, he got an exemption. And that got a lot of Australians angry. That all changed as the show was on the air, literally just in the last couple of minutes, because we've just found out Australia has canceled his visa. They are not even letting him into the country. They say he, quote, did not provide appropriate evidence for that exemption. But we're a little over a week out from the tournament. He's got some time. We'll see what happens between now and then if he's able to get this resolved. But what's interesting is that Djokovic, in his situation, not really all that alone when you look at this issue of athletes being up against their leagues and their sports when it comes to vaccine mandates. Take Kyrie Irving, for example. He plays for the Brooklyn Nets. He's expected to play his first game tonight, even though the season's been going on for something like 3 months. He wasn't hurt. Instead, it was New York's vaccine mandate that kept the unvaccinated Irving from playing in home games. So the Nets decided he would not play at all. Well, that's what they did decide. They've changed their minds since then. More of their players got hurt. COVID piled up. The team really needed him. So, again, this is a trend we're seeing more and more, where these unvaccinated players in different sports are not getting sidelined even without a shot. Joining me now is Shams Charania, senior NBA insider at The Atlantic. Shams, it's great to have you on the show. So talk to me about this whole Kyrie Irving thing, right? Because in December, just last month, the NBA was like, oh, Omicron surge. Let's make sure our COVID protocols are in place. More masking, more testing. But they still don't have a vaccine or booster mandate for players. So if Irving plays tonight, which we think he will, what does that say about where the league is right now?
Kyrie Irving will play tonight. He hasn't played the season's first 35 games of the season. But at the end of the day, the NBA has really let, as far as players playing or not playing, up to the teams and their jurisdictions, as well as the local government. So New York City, as well as Philadelphia, San Francisco, Toronto, there are vaccine mandates. So there are players that have been impacted in those cities that have had to get vaccinated, right? We've seen Andrew Wiggins get vaccinated in San Francisco. Bradley Beal got vaccinated in Washington, D.C. Guys have gotten vaccinated, but Kyrie Irving stood firm on his decision not to get vaccinated, and thus he can't play home games in New York City. So either at Barclays in Brooklyn or Madison Square Garden in New York City. And he also can't play games, road games in Toronto. So it's a situation where now the Nets are bringing him back into the fold. But the NBA does have a 97% vaccine rate.
Right, that's true.
Over 60% of players are boosted. So as of right now, there's no mandate, but it's clear that the NBA does want its players to get vaccinated and then boosted as well.
Walk with me up to the 30,000-foot view, right? Not just in the NBA, but among all sports, because there are these big stars across many leagues who are vaccine skeptics, right? Stories of Aaron Rodgers, Antonio Brown, Djokovic, Irving, right? Play out over the last few months. It feels like in some ways the really good athletes are kind of winning this tug of war, figuring out how to play without being vaccinated. What are you hearing from the NBA, from folks there about balancing, safety plus the desire to get those stars who, by the way, make money for these leagues, have a lot of fans, people want to see them playing?
It's a tricky balance because it's a balance of health and safety as well as business. And at the end of the day, whether it's Aaron Rodgers in football or Novak Djokovic in tennis or Kyrie Irving in basketball, there is an appeal to having and wanting these star players show up on the court. So the NBA would have loved for Kyrie Irving to have gotten vaccinated, to be able to play starting game one, but that just was not the case. He stood firm. The Nets had no choice but to bring him back because they understand he brings them one step closer to a championship, as do the Packers feel with Aaron Rodgers. And Novak Djokovic, as we saw today, it's a lot of these local governments that are dictating terms. And so Novak Djokovic now in Australia, he's seeing kind of what it means for these local jurisdictions.
Shams Charania, I think I got so excited to talk to you. I said you work for The Atlantic. You work for The Athletic, obviously. Thank you so much for being on the show tonight. It's great to see you. And thanks to all of you for watching this hour. We're going to have a whole lot more for you tomorrow. Same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.